As the coronavirus raises more fears for the Chinese economy, Beijing is cutting some tariffs on U.S. goods in half. It has announced plans to cut tariffs on $75 billion in U.S. imports. Yahoo Finance's Jessica Smith is live in D.C. with details. And Jess, this is part of the Phase 1 trade agreement, right? It's just a matter of the timing that perhaps has something to do with what's going on in China right now.
Well, China did not have to cut tariffs as part of the Phase 1 deal, but it did have to reach those purchase targets, and this could help them reach the purchase targets. February 14th is when China says it will cut tariffs, and that's the same day that the U.S. plans to cut tariffs in half on some Chinese goods. So you're seeing China respond in turn as the U.S. is cutting its tariffs. China says that further tariffs could eventually come, depending on how the situation is between the U.S. and China. They have said eventually they'd like to see both countries remove all of the increased tariffs. That's something that they have said consistently throughout these negotiations, throughout this trade war over the past 2 years or so. China has agreed to boost purchases by $200 billion over the next 2 years. And people were concerned about those purchase targets, whether or not they were feasible before the coronavirus. And now that this virus is in the picture, those concerns are even more heightened. So cutting tariffs, as I mentioned, could help them reach those goals. We'll have to keep an eye on this and see what the Trump administration says if the coronavirus does start to hamper their ability to reach those targets.
All right, Jess, we're going to dive a bit more into this. And OK, so Valentine's Day is when the Chinese will be cutting the tariffs, the retaliatory tariffs. But then there's still the next step, and that's the negotiations that are going to take place for Phase 2. They can always slap them back on. They might not, given their difficulties economically right now. But what do you see happening in the next couple of months?
I actually think that what's going on with the coronavirus situation is going to continue to be a driving factor. I think that if you're China, you have to be able to show good news in any way you can, right? So they're displaying an unusual transparency with the depth of the problem there. They're putting liquidity into the market. They're cutting tariffs. I think you're going to continue to see them on the back of this be somewhat more motivated to be friendly.
But at the same time, can they meet? I mean, just to refresh our memory, the exports to China, U.S. exports to China, need to climb to $263 billion this year. Mm-hmm. There's no precedent for that. And then China, on the flip side, needs to boost its purchasing of U.S. goods above 2017 levels. So even with the tariff cut,
yeah, I think that's the main question, at least for the Trump administration. Will they be satisfied with this tariff cut? Because like you mentioned, they had agreed to purchase $200 billion worth of U.S. exports. And in the situation that we're in with the coronavirus, is China in a position to do that right now? Maybe in the second half, if we start to see the coronavirus situation sort of get a little bit better, but I think that's the million-dollar question right now, right?
One of the headwinds they also face, if you just look at agriculture products, they have to cancel contracts that they now have existing, for instance, soybean with Brazil. And there's been a lot of speculation as to whether they would actually be able to do that in time to meet the what they've stated would be the purchase of soybean in the United States. And there you see, soybean prices continue to fall.
Yeah. In that regard, I mean, with the soybeans and the agricultural products, I mean, pork as well, right? Pork is something that they're starting to bring in a little bit more of. But in terms of the fact that a lot of factories are shut down right now in China, maybe they will be able to bring in more than we're thinking that they can.
Hey, investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.